Andrea and Simon are muted. Can't hear us.
Hi, Alison.
Hello, good to see you.
Yeah, and you?
All well?
Yeah, all good here.
Excellent. I'll catch you in a moment. I'm just grabbing a coffee.
Okay.
Sounds like a good idea. Morning, all.
Well, it is 10:30, so I think we will begin. I expect that other folk will join us along the way. We'll wait and see whether that happens. So first of all, a warm welcome to everybody. Thank you for coming along to this question and answer session, which will focus our thoughts on the Synod Review report, which is part of the Synod Book of Reports. We've got up to an hour for this morning. We won't take the whole of the hour if we don't need it. We will if we do. I'd like just to remind you that this session is being recorded, so that people who are not able to be present with us now can listen in at a later time. We'll begin with prayer, and then I'll just say a word about how we're going to deal with the matters before us. So let's pray. Gracious God, you call us to be part of the leadership of your church. And among our responsibilities, we are to discern under the leading of your Spirit the best ways in which to organise our affairs in order that we can respond to your call to be effective as missional disciples in the churches and communities and world in which we are set. You promise to equip us with the gifts and resources that we need to serve you well. Help us to have confidence in your promise and to use your gifts and resources wisely. Give us your grace, we pray, that in our discussions we may discern and respond to your call.
Which I never intended.
That in our thinking, our listening and our speaking, we may be gracious and open to you speaking to us through others. Bind us together and bless us, and help us to have a concern for those whose needs are greatest in the church, in our communities and in our world, as we offer ourselves and the lives of your churches in sacrificial service, following the example of Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We have received, as requested, a number of questions from some folk who are here, and I think we're just looking at the images on my screen, possibly from some who are not. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through the questions that we've received in turn, and Mike Hart and Marion Tugwood going to respond to the questions, and there'll be opportunity if you wish, and if the technology and Leo, who's in charge of the technology, not to put any pressure on you, Leo, if the technology will allow us, we'll take supplementary questions along the way. I suggest that we all mute, apart from the person who is speaking, and that if you wish to speak, once an answer has been given, that you indicate by raising a hand, ideally a hand using the reaction button, but if that's not accessible to you or working, then please put your hand up like this and hopefully someone will notice you. Is that okay? I hope so. Our number has grown now so that we're on 2 screens, which just makes it a little more difficult to notice when hands are up. Dave's got his hand up, he's just taken it down. I'm not quite sure what that was about, but never mind. So, yeah, please, let's try and just keep a little bit of order, because in these Zoom meetings, it's very helpful if there's just one person speaking at one time. So the first question that we have received comes from Will Lindsay from St George's, Carlisle. And he says, I understand the streamlining of committees, which I'm sure is generally welcomed, as is the revised focus areas. Did the review take into account the current and future financial situation of Synod in order to be satisfied that the proposed changes, A, can be funded from income, or for Synod to be satisfied that this is a good use of capital, and B, how this might impact on the long-term budget, which is to be provided over the next 12 months. So that's a pretty pure financial question. And I'm going to ask Mike Hart, who A, has taken a lead, and you will recall presented the report on the Synod review on Saturday, and also of course serves as our Synod treasurer, to respond to Will Lindsay's question.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, the simple answer is that we do not expect the committee structure and the outcomes of the review to cost any more in terms of pound shillings and pence in old money than the current structure does. And indeed, our hope would be that it can actually cost less. But actually, the more significant issue in terms of resources is about a refreshed approach that provides more time for those who volunteer in the service of the Synod and our current staff to work with local churches directly and to spend less time in formal committee meetings. That's part of the principle, is about freeing time of staff officers and volunteers to spend working directly with local churches and less time in committees. So actually, you know, the significant impact on resources is actually in that way, not in the monetary costs of people claiming expenses and things like that.
Thank you, Mike. I can't see Will on either of my screens, so it may be that he will show up at the second one of these sessions on the review report. Does anybody have a question arising either from Will's question or from the response that Mike has made to it? I see no hands. Then we'll move on. I've got a number of questions here which have come from Leslie Husselby from Chorlton Central Church, and we'll deal with them. In turn. We'll take one at a time. The first question that Leslie asks is, how are missional partnerships involved in the focus on missional discipleship? You say in paragraph 16 of the report that work should be, in quotes, rooted in the local. How? Let me just repeat that, and then I'm going to ask Marion, first of all, if she'd like to respond to that, and then Mike. How are missional partnerships involved in the focus on missional discipleship? You say in paragraph 16 that work should be rooted in the local. How? Marion, would you like to respond to Leslie's question?
Yeah, I think probably we need to look back and remind ourselves that the whole reason for missional partnerships was to enable our missional discipleship program throughout the synod. The vision of every member as a missional disciple, and that missional partnerships are one of the ways in which we were going to enable that to happen. That hasn't changed. And so the rooted in the local is those local congregations full of missional disciples adding their voices into the committee structures of the synod. Of course, they already do that in many ways, but this would, we hope, actually open that up for more communication and participation. And so the missional partnerships are an integral part of what we're doing, and they exist to enable missional discipleship. Rooted in the local, every local church is doing all sorts of stuff. You know, we heard good news stories at the synod meeting, and I know there are many, many more across the synod. Those are the stories that we need to share. And the congregational and mission advisors that are envisaged will be a part of this process of two-way communication between the synod committees and the local churches. And that to and fro of communication should enable all of us to be better at mission as a synod, as partnerships, and as local churches. That's the view and the vision, I think, of this new structure.
Thanks, Marion. Mike, have you anything that you wish to add to what Marion said?
No, I think that's sums it up well. No.
Okay. Leslie, would you wish to say anything else in response to what Marion has said? Or are you happy to receive what she said?
I think my next questions might help with this one. I'm not entirely sure how the fact that you've got an intermediary going from the local to the committees, it takes it away more and more from the local church, I think.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go on then to your next question, or we'll take the next two together, I think. Leslie asks, might representatives from missional partnerships be involved in either the executive committee or the new congregations and ministries committee? And then asks, how are the members of committees to be selected? Mike.
Thank you. I mean, in essence, all the members of committees now and all the members of the committees in future will be rooted in their local church and their missional partnership. So that's part of the way in which the connections will work. Some of them may sit on their missional partnership steering groups. Some may not, because of particular skills and particular things that are needed. But we're certainly not intending to make any radical changes to the way in which those committees are composed compared to now. If anything, I think what we might try and do is to have a clearer process that involves, some expressions of interest that enables people to be clear about what they could offer and what's expected of them. But there's a clear expectation that the members of the committee will have a current and ongoing involvement and understanding of what's happening locally in their churches and their missional partnership. So that's how it will work.
I don't think we envision that every missional partnership will have a representative on either or both of those committees. And actually, that's not the case now in our current structures. So that, every missional partnership is not necessarily represented on every area pastoral committee. But we still are able, I believe, to find out information and to know where churches are in need of assistance or are doing good stuff. And what these new structures would aim to do is actually to improve that communication. So rather than taking away from the local, it ought to bring the local more into the decision-making processes and thought processes of the synod as a whole. And the idea is not to have the kind of, sometimes we hear them and us idea, but more that we really are all part of this synod, and we have a clearer understanding, all of us, of what's going on round and about and more widely across our synod. So there will be inevitably representation from all the missional partnerships in all the committees. It might not be formally that's the convener or even a selected member of that committee, although a partnership might decide that when asked to put a name forward, that together collectively they come up with the person that would best represent them as a partnership. So I think what we're doing now and what we hope to do in the future will mesh very helpfully together when it comes to populating these committees.
Thanks both. Let's just I've seen Mike's hand up. Let's just go on to how the members of committees to be selected, and then I'll come back for any follow-up. Mike, would you? Or Mike?
I think I covered that in my answer in terms of, we don't envisage any significant change to the way in which members are selected now, in terms of looking for people across, with a range of experiences from a broad geographical spread of the synod, and that's how it works now, and that's how it will work in the future.
Okay, thank you. I saw Mike Walsh's hand up. Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I've got some concerns, I have to say. I agree with the direction wholeheartedly that Marion says this review is aimed at, in being strengthening the links between the local and the synod, putting an end to them and us as best we can. I'm sure that's what we all want. I'm just not yet convinced that some of what's been proposed will achieve that. And I think there might be alternatives that are more successful in achieving that aim. My overriding concern, I think, in reading the report is that it introduces itself by saying the synod officers and staff and committee conveners have been consulted and come up with a plan. And from that perspective, I think they've come up with a pretty good plan. But it doesn't say anywhere that it is involved consultation with churches and elders and members as to how it feels as users of the system, as opposed to the people that are the system. If I reference the new Synod website, it says that we understand Synod in 3 ways. The Synod is all the churches grouped together for common purpose and resource sharing. The Synod is its officers and staff, which carry out functions on behalf of the churches. And the Synod is also a council of the United Reformed Church and has links and responsibilities there. It seems to me that this report has only come from the perspective of the Synod as officers and staff, and it's not yet done the work of consulting with Synod as its churches, its members, its people. And I think we'd get some different suggestions if that work took place before we're asked to make any decisions. So, and then just to add, in terms of communication and decision-making and participation, I have the concerns that Leslie raised, that we're not actually changing that much. We're moving to a system that's more streamlined from a staff and officers point of view, but which still requires us to create some intermediary post for the purpose of communication between the two. And I don't think we want communication between the two. We want participation across the board. And saying that, well, there will be people from missional partnerships on committees doesn't scratch that itch. People are there with different hats on. It needs to be a concentrated focus, in my opinion. So I propose something like the Synod Executive is one person from each missional partnership. And the Synod officers and staff members attend in the way that staff secretaries attend General Assembly. They're there to present reports and give advice and make progress on the work that's agreed. But it's the 11 missional partnerships that give the agreement. And that really puts the local at the heart of everything then, and reduces the need for some arbitrary communication network, because the people who need to know are in the room making the decisions with the officers and staff.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Mike, would you like to respond? Mike Hart, that is.
I mean, one of the things we've wrestled with Mike is at what point to consult, because often it is very difficult to consult widely on a very abstract concept. It's far easier to crystallise views and discussions against a set of proposals, and that's the line with the approach that Synod Executive have taken at this point. It's not a finished piece of work. It's, you know, we're certainly far from having all the I's and T's dotted and crossed. And you know, but the feeling was very clearly that it was right and better in terms of that dialogue to go forward on the basis of some proposals rather than simply a blank sheet of paper.
If that's the case, then I'd suggest that this is a very helpful progress report, and there should be no resolution at the Synod meeting in November. There should be a discussion about what the next stage of consultation is and what the details are going to be, so Synod can be confident in the remits of the committees, the nomination process, the selection process, and issues of governance and accountability. Because at the moment, I'm sure all those things will be covered, but I still don't think it's appropriate to ask Synod to sign a blank cheque.
Okay, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Mike. Adam had his hand raised. Adam.
Just one point of order is that we seem to be getting questions through the message box as well as people raising them. Might be good for the chair to decide what to do with those. But the other point is, I wonder if this could lead to a stakeholder engagement. So actually thinking about getting someone to think about how do we actually engage with the missional partnerships and the churches. So I suppose taking what Leslie has asked and making it really practical. So when the how is asked, we actually are able to answer how will it be rooted in the local. Well, one of the ways it might be rooted in the local is actually to go through an engagement process with the key stakeholders, so that we can have a clear view of how people want to function within this. So for me, it's the hows that are really important, not just the more abstract. And I take what Mike Hart said on board, that this is quite an abstract process at the moment. But I wonder how we ground it.
Thank you, Adam. Before we go on any further, one or 2 points. First of all, we have folk making comments in the chat box, which is good and helpful. Please do continue to do that. The second point, which is related to that, is that Tim Hopley, our Synod clerk, is taking good notes of the discussion. And of course, as I said at the beginning, the discussion is being recorded, so we'll have a record of it. So the comments in the chat box will be kind of brought into the scheme of things as Tim writes up the notes at the end. So those comments will not be kind of ignored or forgotten. I understand that Will Lindsay is with us now. Will, you're welcome. I just want to say to you that the question that you asked has been answered, I think, before you arrived with us.
No problem, Brian. I'm sorry I'm late.
No, don't worry. But we'll deal with that later.
Okay.
Rather than going over it again,
No, that's fine.
You can listen to it afterwards, or we can brief you later on after the meeting.
I'll listen to it afterwards. It's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So let's go on. If I can find out where we're up to, let's go on to another of Leslie Hustleby's questions, which is about the Missional Development Network. Her question is, or questions, how effective are networks, and how do you envision them operating? Mike or Marion?
I think if I start, I think we very deliberately in the discussions in executive used the term network here, because the design and intention is to have something that is much more fluid and is able to engage very much more widely than a simple committee could. It builds on our experience with networks such as the Mission Mentors and the network they've created, the Green Apostles and things like that. And it's really designed to enable us to be innovative and creative in responding to needs and emerging issues in local churches, to ensure that good practice is effectively shared. So its focus is very much about being developmental and innovative and engaging very widely and not being a formal committee, other than on the odd occasions when it might need to be. So it's designed to be much more fluid, much more engaging than a traditional committee, and builds on some of the experience we've already had. I don't know, Marion, whether there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think the vision is that there would be start and finish groups for particular pieces of work, and that those might be far more creative pieces of work than our current committee structures tend to enable us to do. So that if the whole network meets, say, for a day together, all sorts of things might spin off from that. But then instead of sitting on somebody's desk as a minute that doesn't get looked at until the next meeting, there's actually a start and finish group that goes off to do some work around it, and doesn't solidify into a subcommittee. So we don't burden ourselves with unnecessary structures, but we do enable flexibility and creativity. That there are lots and lots of good ideas that come out from our churches that sometimes actually don't get picked up or see the light of day because we don't have the fluid structures that enable that to happen in a timely way.
Thank you. Let me just make one comment, and that is that my recollection is that Mel Campbell, who kind of drove the initial stage of this review, I think it was Mel who came up with the suggestion that that this aspect of the Synod's work should be more helpfully described as a network rather than a committee. But I do think also that she recognised that whilst the network would operate with, as I think Marion said just now, small groups of people kind of doing work on particular subjects, she also recognised, and maybe this hasn't been described adequately in what's been written in the report to the Synod meeting. She was also clear, I think, that this group would need to meet together more formally sometimes in order to review and progress the work of the groups that were working within it. Mike
Yeah.
Walsh.
Just to say that those are helpful clarifications. I'm happier about that suggestion now it's been filled out a little bit. I think it does need to be both and, not either or, in terms of committee or network. It sounded like a much more creative and approach that will enable wider participation, the kind of which I was going on about earlier. So my question is, why aren't they all networks then, or why hasn't the same kind of thinking been applied to the rest of the committees, which by talking about continuity and the similar kind of people filling the posts and those kind of things that Mike was envisaging, sounds like we're just changing the names of the others.
Thanks, Mike. Mike, do you want to respond to Mike?
I was simply saying the process would be the same. I wasn't necessarily saying with the same people.
Yeah, but we'll get the same kind of people if we don't.
There's opportunity. I think the part you summed it up very well, Mike. In that there is in all of this there is a balance between, there are certain things that constitutionally in the URC the Synod has to do and has to make decisions about, and that has to be balanced with how it's creative with local churches. And I think in a sense what this structure tries to do is to focus some of the things that the Synod has to do in the Congregation and Ministries Committee, and focus the mission network as a balance to that in the creative and innovative and that certainly was part of the thinking and discussion that we had with in Synod Executive about the roles and the balance. But certainly the intention is not to just automatically populate with the same old faces, but to, you know, adopt the same principles about breadth of representation, etc., etc.
Thanks, Mike. That's helpful. Can I just quickly add? It's my gut feeling, though, as an organisation gets smaller, representative structures start not to work, because rather than it being a small number representing a huge number of people, it's a small number representing a slightly larger number of people. And then that just starts to feel like some are being consulted and some aren't. Some are involved and some are not. It's got to be much more participative as we continue to shrink in number, is my gut feeling.
Maybe I could just make one comment in response to what Mike has just said, and that is that I certainly wouldn't disagree with what you've just said. I would say alongside it that that our structure at the moment, particularly in some aspects, is failing the churches of the Synod because of the decrease in our capacity to staff the committee structure that we've got. And that's one reason why, not the only reason, but certainly one reason why it was important that we began this review. And also it's important that we progress this review without any undue delay, because we are suffering at the moment in certain aspects because some of our committees are not functioning in the way that they need to, and we need an alternative approach. I'm going to go on to another.
Brian.
Sorry.
Marilyn has her hand up.
I beg your pardon. Okay, thank you. I didn't see that. Marilyn Piper.
I think that you need to get your head round what the how bit is. You need very much to be more consulting of local churches and involving them much, much more. There are far too many people in local churches who haven't got a clue what Synod is and don't care. And the only way you'll get them to care is to involve them much more in the initial processes. I was very impressed with what Mike was saying. I thought he was going down the right way. I think it should be thought of more, how to do it and how to get these people who are in our churches very supportive in local churches, but haven't a clue about Synod and at the moment couldn't care less. You've got to involve them and find a way of doing it for things to move on.
And that's exactly the idea of the networking, because like-minded people will come together around particular areas, say eco-churches, and join together in helping to shape the policy of the Synod. And so I also think that what Mike said about start and finish groups in other areas may well develop. This is a kind of starting point of the process, and we do anticipate a continual review and revision of what's happening. Mel writes that into the discussion she had with those with whom she consulted, and so I'm with you, but I'm also with Brian in that I think we need to begin to make these changes sooner rather than later.
Okay, so thanks to Marilyn for that contribution. Going to move on. I don't see any more hands up at the moment. Going to move on to a simple question which Leslie asks, and that is, who monitors the work of the executive committee? I'm going to ask Mike to respond to that.
The simple answer is, as now, the work of the executive committee is monitored by the Synod meeting. That's who the executive committee are accountable to, both now and would be in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mike. We move on then to some questions about the congregation and ministries advisors that are mentioned in the report. There's a couple of questions from Leslie Husselby, and then one or two from Jackie Embry. So I'll put all these together, I think. So are these full-time or voluntary posts? Are they paid? Do they come out of our deployment quota? And how many are envisaged? Marion, would you like to
We'll certainly kick
make
off
an
on it.
initial response to that?
Yes.
Thank you.
And there'll be voluntary posts. If the volunteer has got full-time capability, yeah, we would love that. We'll take it. But there'll be voluntary posts, and as with all our volunteer posts, you know, people will give as they are able in order to achieve the work that we hope they will do. They won't be paid, but expenses will be paid, as again with all our volunteer posts. Ministers or lay people may take on these roles, but they won't be coming out of our deployment quota. So we all of us, whether we're ordained to eldership, we're ordained to secondary ministry, or commissioned to work with CRCWs, whether we're people who want to just bring our gifts into the life of the church as members of churches, we offer what we can, and usually that's over above the work that we do. And I guess, you know, these things are no different to that. Obviously, when we are looking for those people, we'll be looking for particular skill sets, and that's true again of other voluntary posts within the church. You know, if we're looking for a treasurer, we like someone who can add up, which is why I never hold that kind of position. So we will be looking for people with pastoral skills, with listening skills, with the ability to get alongside folk. And I know there are lots of people out there with that. This is something different. Hopefully that will encourage people to come forward and offer their gifts. In terms of numbers, Mike, do you want to answer that? How many of these people there'll be? I will confess at the moment, a little bit hazy.
Well, I think it goes back to part of the thing you were saying, Marion, is the actual numbers would depend on numbers of volunteers and how much time they were able to give. I mean, I think the principle would be that they would go back to the engagement, missional partnerships, etc., is that we would look to make sure that any advisor was working with churches within the same missional partnership, not dotted here, there, and everywhere to provide that connection and support. I mean, my guess is that we're probably looking at somewhere between, I don't know, 8 and 12, depending on numbers and capacity.
And also these individuals will be part of teams, so they will work with the conveners of steering groups. They will work with the ministry teams in the missional partnership and across the synod. They will work with the moderator. They will work with the mission development mentors, so that they will have a key role in all of this communication stuff, this bringing the local into the focus that we need in order to ensure that our churches are best served, and that, you know, they'll have links in obviously to people like the synod treasurer and finance officer, if that's the assistance that a church needs. They can broker those conversations. Sometimes, again, you know, them and us means people don't pick up the phone to the right person because they don't know who it is, as Marion pointed out, or they're just worried because it's kind of them. And the idea is to make all of this much more meshed together, much more friendly, kind of user interface with what needs to be done at Synod and what's actually going on in local churches.
Thanks, Marion. Can I ask folk to mute if they're not speaking, because we're getting some background interference, which isn't terribly helpful. Thank you. Adam.
I think these roles sound very exciting to me and really important, but it feels a lot to ask a volunteer to do. And if they're so integral, would there be any capacity with respect to maybe employ at least some people in a similar capacity as the mission mentors? Because it sounds like so key to how the synod will function.
Thank you, Adam. Does anybody else want to comment on this? Okay, let's move on to another question or questions. These from Jackie Embry. Will they, that's the advisors we've been talking about, will they be part of the new Congregations and Ministries Committee? If not, how will they communicate with the committee? Let's deal with that one before we go on to the next one. Marion, I've lost you. Where are you? Sorry, or Mike? I don't mind. Hello, will someone answer?
Yes, I was looking to Mike, who I think got slightly better grasp with some of the structural things than me, but they will communicate with that committee. They will, I think, be a part of it and indeed communicate with it. Although there are some functions of it that perhaps they wouldn't need to be there for. So it's one of those co-opt people for what they need to offer, rather than making them sit through a long meeting. They will be important in bringing those ideas and issues to the fore. So there will also be communication, obviously, with the convener of that committee. I don't know, Mike, do you want to pick up any more on that?
No, I think you've summed it up very well. I mean, I don't think I think we already do look at flexible ways in terms of involving people in those sort of decisions and that sort of work to make sure we've got the right skills and knowledge present.
Thank you. Does anybody want to come back? Anything, Jackie?
I mean, I must admit that this is the part of the review that I am confused about. I mean, we've talked about having up to a dozen of these. If you have them on the committee, then you won't have room for anybody else. It's not clear to me what they will do different from what ministers are doing. They've talked about pastoral and problem-solving support for churches. Isn't that what ministers are doing? And in terms of communications, I can't see why the communications can't come through the steering groups, who should know if there are difficulties in churches. So I'm unclear as to what these people will add other than extra bodies, which obviously are always welcome. But it does seem that there's a very fuzzy edges, and I'm really not at all clear whether this is something that is positive or if we'd be better using other people. who are already there, sort of thing.
It's certainly true that ministers do offer and will offer pastoral and problem solving care to congregations. Within a missional partnership, given that the steering group, along with the ministers, has worked out what the priorities for mission are, it may well be that the ministers or minister are really involved heavily with a particular piece of work, and it would be detrimental to be drawn away from that. But equally, there's an issue that does need resolving somewhere else, and here these people can step in and walk alongside a church for that time, or to ensure that they get the right support from other places within the synod or other places within the parish.
I think.
Are other people hearing Marion?
No, I think we've lost Marion for the moment. She has been having problems with broadband connection, and I think that's just hampering her at the moment.
Right, can I just add two things? I think one, executive would acknowledge that this is the part, which is less developed than the committee structures of this, and one which clearly we were expecting as part of the next piece of work to have some strong discussions with members of the synod meeting and local churches in fine tuning. This is certainly an area which we know needs some more development. I think the second thing that's interesting, listening to the feedback and comments, is the number of feedback that is based on missional partnerships and missional partnership steering groups in particular having a much stronger, I'm going to use the word constitutional role in the life and the structure of synod. I wasn't party to the introduction and development of them, but I always understood that they were much more of a voluntary federation than anything that had any formal place in the structure. So it's interesting to hear that feedback, because certainly that was the part of the framework within which discussions in Synod Executive have been trying to frame this work in terms of the partnerships being not part of any formal decision making structure, but that, you know, if the feedback from, you know, people involved in them and local churches is that would make sense now, then that does open out a lot of new possibilities. But it's very helpful to have that push coming from below rather than coming down from synod officers.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I've returned. Thank you, Mike, for picking that up. I think you echoed something that I was trying to say when BT decided to not let me. That the role of the steering group is about the local, particularly giving a steer to mission priorities and agreeing with ministers how their time will be used. And if a minister's engaged in a really particular piece of work, and it would be detrimental to pull back from that, but there is a situation that needs dealing with, looking at, walking alongside, then that's where these people would really come into their own and can assist in that way, in making sure that the right contacts are made, the appropriate assistance is given, and all the time talking to the ministers about it. It's not about taking them out of any kind of loop or not having them involved in that pastoral and problem solving, but just at a slight arm's length so that they can continue with the piece of work that together with the steering group has been determined to be a mission priority. So they have a kind of a role in helping stuff to gel together, and for it's about enhancing what we can offer to local churches. I think is the long and short of it. And I agree with Mike that this is an area where more development work needs to be done in thinking this really clearly through. But certainly it was a suggestion that now came up. We could see possibilities. And although I take what was said about them being an important role, and therefore maybe we should look towards paying them, I also think that for some people who've got those particular kinds of skills and want to work with congregations, that it just could be a very exciting volunteer opportunity too. I've said enough.
Before we go on, let me make one comment from my perspective on this. First of all, I'm aware that that a number of other synods use this kind of role in the way they go about things, and do so very helpfully. Those occupying these roles, I think, have being given different names, but these folk are around to offer pastoral support to ministers and churches, and to kind of be the first port of call if there's any difficulty. And that role, in my mind at least, is distinctive from the role of our mission and discipleship mentors, whose role is specifically to help local churches and those offering the ministry to discern and engage specifically with the mission opportunities that God provides in their settings. So they're quite distinct roles, and as I say, are played out in different ways under different guises and names in other synods of the United Reformed Church. I'm conscious of the clock. It's 11:25, so we'd stick to an hour, and we're going to do that. We've got one or two more questions. I noticed that Mike Wolf had his hand up again. Do you want to come in, Mike?
Very quickly. I really have warmed to this idea of these posts as the discussion has gone on. I think the Wales Synod calls them Synod Elders, which perhaps makes it a bit more clear what their role is. It's that kind of pastoral relationship linky kind of thing. My one concern is I'm not sure from the report what's going to happen to area pastoral committees. I think they're going, but it isn't clear. My worry would be that this role could make individuals the fall guy for bad decisions or unpopular decisions or miscommunicated decisions, when area pastoral committee is that buffer at the moment. And I wouldn't want individuals to be getting loads of flack when things go wrong.
Thank you. Helpful comment. I'm going to move us on. Can I just ask Jackie, have we dealt adequately with the questions that you've raised, or have we covered each area, even if we've not dealt with them adequately?
I think you've covered the areas. I can't say at the moment that I'm convinced that this is necessarily the way forward.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. Now, there's a final question, which is long, but I'm going to read it to you. It's about really, I think, it's about the role of steering groups, which we've touched on a number of times during the past hour. Question comes from Christopher Whitehead from Bramhall. He says, I was struck on reading the Synod review that there was no mention at all of the steering groups for the missional partnerships in the proposed new structures. What is to be the status of the steering groups, and how and to whom do they report? The review proposal seems to suggest that the link between the local churches and the committees of synod will be through the mission discipleship mentors. However, the current terms of reference for steering groups and their membership do not explicitly include the mission and discipleship mentors as a member of the steering group. Currently, local churches report to their area local pastoral committee and can directly send issues for discussion by synod committees via this route. Without careful considerations, the local churches will feel even further removed from the governance and care of the synod than they are at present. Having just read that through again out loud, I think we have touched on the gist of what Christopher is asking. I'm not sure that Christopher's here with us. I don't think I've seen him. I'm going to ask Marion or Mike if they wish to make any further response to what Christopher has raised. No, Mike.
I think the sort of 2 points I would make is you know, in terms of the final sentence is absolutely what we're trying to avoid doing is increasing the separation. I mean, that's the negative bit. Actually, the intention is to do precisely the opposite. I think the other comment I would make is that currently, I certainly don't think all churches feel that they're able to communicate effectively through the area pastoral committees in the current structure. I think the pattern is much more of a mixed bag from the feedback I have from some of the local churches. So I don't think I would just take issue with that point. I think we also do have to reflect that some of our area pastoral committees in particular struggle significantly to get sufficient volunteers around the table to be able to do their work in an effective way. And you know, that is a challenge for us and for them and for the local churches in their area.
Thanks, Mike. Just conscious of Marilyn's hand up. Marilyn Piper.
Yeah. A big thing missing from this is the word elders. They are the jewel in our crown and they are not being used at all, hardly. Also, the wider role of ministers. Isn't it part of their role that they do some wider work as part of their role? Could this not be administered better by the moderators who insist that every single minister is doing some sort of wider church role according to their abilities? Two areas that are being underutilised, not mentioned in this. Once again, it's been skirted over. You will only get the elders involved if they understand what's going on and they are consulted in the early stages. And it needs to be an integral part of this review. At the moment, it isn't.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you. We've just floated past 11:30. We've been at it for an hour. I'm thinking and hoping that we have covered each of the areas of question that were raised with us. Really grateful to everybody who has shown up this morning. Let me say to you again that Tim Hopley has been making good notes of the questions and the responses and the supplementary questions and the other comments that have been made. Both those comments that have been made orally and indeed those comments that have been put up on the chat board, and so those will be taken into account when the notes of this meeting are written up. You will know, I hope, from the book of reports that there is a second session to discuss this report at another time. We've provided 2 sessions for each of the 3 areas of these question and answer sessions. And we'll be dealing with things in a similar way on that second occasion. And there are, of course, also question and answer sessions about matters to do with finance and about the other reports that are in the book of reports, and the dates and times and the link for those, the Zoom link for those meetings are all in the book of reports. So thanks everybody for sharing this morning. Thanks for your participation, and look forward to seeing you on another occasion before, if not on Saturday the 14th of November. Thank you very much.